Hello everyone, I'm Pulkit Mathur, founder of The Spiritual Bee, and through this video I would like to first and foremost introduce myself to you, because over the last few years I've been interacting with many of you over YouTube, over WhatsApp, over Facebook, and even through email, and so far I've been rather invisible, and so I wanted to take this opportunity to put a face to the person who's founded The Spiritual Bee with whom you're interacting. So I'm very happy to introduce myself to you. And secondly, I wanted to use this medium of a direct broadcast so that I can answer some of the simpler questions that many of you have been asking. And in this way, we can cover more ground in a quicker fashion. And then I can keep the longer detailed presentations to cover those Vedantic concepts that are a little bit more involved and which require a visual medium of presentation for better understanding. So with that introduction, let us move to one of the questions that some of you have been asking me recently, which is that what is the proof of Vedanta? How do we know that Vedanta is correct or genuine? How do we know that by following the teachings of Vedanta, we will actually arrive at something called the soul realization or God realization? How do we know that the soul exists or the God exists? How do we know that all these things are true and not just some kind of fake stuff that is perpetuated, some kind of a myth that the ancients believed in, and in today's scientific age it probably is no longer valid. So how do we know that Vedanta is the true and correct knowledge and not something that is false? So the thing for us to understand is that Vedanta is not based upon belief. It is not based upon the blind acceptance of the teachings of some guru or some prophet, because we feel that, if we don't accept these teachings, something bad will happen to us, or that God will get angry because we are dishonoring him by not accepting his teachings, or that after death, we'll go to hell because we did not follow these teachings in our life. So it is not based upon any kind of superstitious, blind, irrational belief like this, but Vedanta is actually based upon experience. So the key word that you'll always come across in Vedanta is not belief, but it is actually realization. What realization means is that you experience the reality that underpins this universe, a reality which normally living your day-to-day life you would never, really come across, because it is a very subtle reality. So the only way to come in touch with this reality is by turning inwards through the process of yoga and trying to understand the greater truths that underpin the universe. And some of these truths are that consciousness is not a product of neurological reactions or interactions or neurons firing in the brain. Rather, it is a separate entity by itself, and it is possible to separate your consciousness from its association with the mind and body. So, these are the types of truths that underlie Vedanta. And the only way to verify these truths is actually to experience them. So, Vedanta is totally based upon realization. The key word in Vedanta you'll always come across is realization. As Swami Vivekananda has said, truth has to be experienced pratyaksh. That means first hand for yourself. Only then can you say that that thing exists. Otherwise, it is just a guess or a conjecture. So we are not talking about guesses, conjectures, beliefs, theoretical understandings, or, intellectual machinations of the mind where, we are thinking like, okay, it must be so, or like some kind of logical deduction. Vedanta is not based upon any such thing. It is based upon actually experiencing greater realities, which can only be experienced by turning inwards. You cannot experience them by turning outwards into the world. It has to be experienced by going inwards towards the source of your own consciousness. So that is what is the aim of Vedanta. Now this teaching about not believing in anything blindly, but in actually experiencing the truth, the reality for ourselves, has actually been stressed in many of the Vedantic texts, such as the Mundaka Upanishad in verse 3.2.3. Now this particular verse of the Mundaka Upanishad has actually been translated and commented upon by Swami Vivekananda, who writes that this Atman is not to be reached by too much talking, nor is it to be reached by the power of the intellect, nor by much study of the scriptures. Nay, ours is the only scripture in the world that declares not even by the study of the scriptures can the Atman be realized. Not talks, not lecturing, none of that, but it is to be realized, it is to be experienced. Now the Uttara Gita in verse 2.4 goes on to explain this in a little bit more of an interesting way. The Uttara Gita says that mere book learners are like spoons without taste. You know, when the spoon is always involved in cooking, you cook something delicious and the spoon is always immersed in the cooking. However, the spoon cannot taste the food. It does not know how delicious the food is. So similarly, those who are very much immersed in book learning, who do not have practical experience of the truths that are found in the books, those people who are very much immersed in book learning, very much immersed in rituals, who blindly follow rituals, those people are like spoons who cannot taste what they are immersed in. A book learner may be immersed in the wisdom of the Vedas, and yet he's unable to taste, yet he's unable to experience that wisdom. So that kind of immersion is that of a spoon, and it's entirely useless. Unless you experience something for yourself, unless you experience these truths, these realities, it is all a waste. Now, just as in science, when someone has a theory, it has to also be observed in practice. You know, like for example, if somebody had, if Newton had the theory of gravitation, he came up with this theory because he observed some reality. He observed the apple falling to the ground, and that was the reality that he observed. So he postulated a theory for it. And his theory, or the formula that Newton came up for gravity, it was such a formula that you could repeatedly verify the correctness of that formula by conducting many experiments, you know. So I sitting in India could conduct an experiment and I can say that yes, Newton's theory of gravity is correct. And somebody sitting in America can conduct a similar experiment and conclude that yes, Newton's theory of gravity is correct. So the theory of gravity has been repeatedly verified by numerous people across time, across the world, you know, and so we know that that is something that holds true. Now, the same thing holds for Vedanta. The rishis of Vedanta too observe certain realities. They observe that the soul is the source of our consciousness, and that this consciousness is independent of the mind and the body. It has an independent existence. Even if the mind died tomorrow or the body died, this consciousness would still exist. So these truths about these more subtle realities were witnessed by these rishis. They experienced these truths, they observed these truths, and then they compiled all these truths and outlined them in the Upanishads. So the Upanishads are a collection of truths observed by various rishis. It's not just one rishi. So there are numerous rishis that have arrived at these truths, you know. So Vedanta is not a body of work of one person, but just like physics, you know, like physics is a science which is a body of work of a large number of scientists. So similarly, Vedanta too is a huge body of work of a large number of rishis who have observed certain truths, who have verified and cross-checked and cross-verified, you know, other rishis' findings, and they have accumulated all these findings in the texts which are called the Upanishads. Now there are other Vedantic texts also like the Bhagavad Gita, etc. But the Upanishads are the oldest known Vedantic texts, so that's why I'm referring to them. So all the truths of Vedanta are actually chronicled in the Upanishads. Now it is not that just the ancient rishis you know, were able to verify these truths and come at them or arrive at them. Across the ages, we have had numerous rishis. You know, for the last 2,000, 3,000 years, there has been a continuous stream of very advanced rishis. You know, many of them were God realized, and they have on their own, based on their own experience, based on their own realizations, confirmed what is being postulated or expressed in the Upanishads. So it is not that somebody said something in 2000 or 3000 BC and we are just blindly following it today. No, it's not like that. We had Shankaracharya, we had, just to speak of in our recent times, we had Guru Nanak Dev Ji, we had Kabir, we had Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we had Swami Vivekananda, we had Sri Ramakrishna, we had Sri Aurobindo, we had Swami Sivananda, Sri Ram Sharma Acharya. We have had numerous, countless Ramana Maharishi. We've had countless rishis who have, they don't regurgitate what is written in the Upanishads. No, it's not like that. They based on their own experience and their own realizations confirm what is said in the Upanishads, and sometimes even go beyond that, because the Upanishads are just a chronicle of certain truths about the universe. But you see, the universe is infinite and there are infinite truths. So beyond the Upanishads too you can go, and that is what the Vedas say, is that the truths in the Vedas are what you would call almost preliminary, and there is much more information that you can access even by going beyond. But at the very minimum, the experiences that you have in yoga should tally with the Upanishads, because these are the verified truths. So at the very minimum, your experience in yoga or samadhi or whatever has to tally with the Upanishads, and then you can also go beyond that. So Vedanta in this way is like science. It is a collection of truths that have been observed about the reality that is this universe. And these truths have been repeatedly verified across time by numerous people. And the beauty of Vedanta is that it does not tell you, a practitioner who's just starting off, it does not tell you that, you should believe this because we have experienced it. It does not tell you anything like that. What it says is that you too can experience these truths for yourself by following the path of yoga, which is very well defined in Vedanta, the practices that you have to do. And here I do not mean, the physical practices of yoga. The physical practices of yoga, which is very prevalent right now across the world, is just the tip of the iceberg. It is just tuning the body, but ultimately you have to tune the mind so that you can then get to the soul. So the whole aim and purpose of Vedanta is not to make you believe in anything. You should actually start as a skeptic. But then by following the path of yoga, if you can experience even a few of these truths, you will know then for yourself, that, okay, if A and B are true, if the first or the second truth or these smaller truths that I've experienced are actually true, then by logical inference, all the truths of Vedanta are true, and so you would then be propelled by your own spiritual realizations to pursue Vedanta to the highest point, which is the point of soul realization and God realization. So the whole thing in Vedanta is experience, it is realization, and there is no room at all for blind belief, for blind faith, for superstition, for blindly accepting something which is true, just because you fear some outcome. So there is no room for fear also. Vedanta is based upon experience, on realization, and it tells us that we need to attain to the goal ourselves. It is not enough that the rishis have attained to God realization. That is not the goal. The goal is that every human being has to attain to this point. So basically, we can verify the truths of Vedanta ourselves, and the proof is actually in the pudding, in eating the pudding yourself. So, no matter how much somebody may describe the pudding and say, oh wow, it's very tasty, very nice, and really awesome, it's very chocolatey. There's no point in having blind belief in any sort of pudding, unless you actually taste it for yourself, unless you actually experience its chocolatiness, there is no point. So, the whole of Vedanta, we must realize and remember, is that it is based upon experience and realization. Now, one little addendum that I'd like to make to this video is that in this video I mentioned that the universe is infinite and that there are infinite truths to be discovered. So here I'm not talking about the physical universe, because the physical or the material universe that we see is most likely finite, although science I think does not have any conclusive view about this yet. But then behind the physical universe is actually a subtle or a mental universe, also known as the Sukshma universe. And then behind that is the causal universe. and behind the causal is the soul or the consciousness universe, which is actually infinite. And then, there are worlds inside worlds, as the Yoga Vashishta has described. There are actually multiple universes. So there are really infinite truths that you can discover about reality, about the nature of, the nature of the ultimate reality, and also the nature of these, relative realities, which are the material universe and the subtle universe and all that. So really the number of truths that one can discover are truly infinite, and therefore yoga really is a very, very vast field. It's not a small field at all. Now the second addendum, and I'm only clarifying it because sometimes there is a tendency between people to misunderstand. So the second addendum is that it is not that Guru Nanak Dev Ji set out to verify the Upanishads. That's not what I meant. And it is not that Kabir Ji set out to verify the Upanishads, but what happened was that they themselves, based upon their own experience, came upon the same truths that are outlined in the Upanishads. And anybody who reads the teachings of Guru Nanak Dev Ji or Kabir and also reads the Upanishads can easily see that they are very consistent with each other. And this consistency can only come when the same thing has been experienced. It cannot come from the mind. It cannot come from Guru Nanak Dev Ji imagining certain things or Kabir Ji postulating that, I think this is how it is. It cannot come like that. It has to come from experience, and then only the consistency comes. Another example that I can give is that of a mother's love. Till you have a mother, you will not really know what it feels like to have a mother's unconditional love. To somebody who's never had a mother, that person can never really know what a mother's unconditional love feels like. But those people who are lucky to have really awesome and good mothers, they immediately know. And when they speak of the mother's unconditional love, they speak from experience, and somebody else who's experienced the same reality will also say the same thing. So these are things which are subjective. You have to experience the truth in order to know that it is a truth. No amount of hypothesis or conjecture or imagination can give you the full picture, can give you the exact picture, unless you actually experience it for yourself. So the stress of Vedanta thus is on experience, on witnessing truth firsthand, on experiencing reality pratyaksh for oneself. Just as you see something in front of you and then you believe, the belief has to have some kind of a real basis. Like, it should not be an irrational belief, but it should be founded and based upon truth. Then only the belief is rational and genuine. Otherwise, it is a blind belief. So Vedanta is not based upon any kind of blind belief. So with this, I conclude this video, and we'll meet again in the next video. Till then, goodbye.